An Empire of Ice and Fire by Longclaw 1-6. Chapter 40. The Emperor's War. "To the Targaryens' dark dynasty!" shouted a random knight, half-empty wine flagon in his hand. "May they reign for 1,000 years! Ha! Hoo! Ha! Hoo! Ha! Hoo! To the death of the asshole in King's Landing!" Already slurring his words and swaying in the gentle breeze, a tipsy smile crossed his face as he fell forward, spilling drink on the ground where he slammed into it. A moment's silence was soon followed by a raucous cheer. A minstrel started up a jaunty tune, and the celebration was back in full swing. On the night following the combined army's decisive victory over the forces of House Lannister, no expense was spared from the loot captured within the enemy camp. Far from the Spartan fixtures that Robb Stark and Grey Worm allowed for themselves and their men, what the Chimera's army provided was nothing short of Epicurean. The finest Dornish and Arbor wines, fresh meats both local and exotically fresh slaughtered and prepared, ocean fish, shrimp and octopi carted from the ocean in watertight tanks. The tents of Tigget Lannister and Adam Marbrand were piled to the ceiling in gold and silver, all of which was distributed by order of the King and Queen among the men for their own enjoyment following the hard-fought victory. Celebrations rocked the plains outside the castle and from within Riverrun itself, young and old, male and female, rich and poor, all sharing in the bounty. While the exultant and drunken ramblings outside continued unabated, nestled within the walls of the castle, the King and Queen celebrated in their own way. "I love you," he whispered. "I nearly lost you today." "You didn't. I'm here, my love." Closing the distance, she crushed her lips to his in a loving kiss. Tightening her hold on his chest, Dany nuzzled his neck as a wave of calm washed over her. I hope we made a baby tonight, Jon." Taken aback for a moment, Jon absent-mindedly stroked her back. In the revelation of the twins and the fast pace both of the wedding and the first campaign of the war for the Iron Throne, the fact that Dany might want more children hadn't been one he considered. Looking back, it was stupid that he hadn't. Silence coming from him for several moments. Dany couldn't help but think the worst. "Jon, you don't want another?" She bit her lip and shifted her gaze. Hugging her tighter against his body, Jon placed a kiss on her silver locks. Even matted with sweat from their excursions, she still smelled heavenly. "Of course not. I would love to have more children with you." The line of succession needed to be firm after all. In the event something happened to Rhaegar, gods forbid. But she looked up at him. "But what?" Dany reached up to cup his cheek. "What is wrong, my love?" "I almost lost them. Arya and Rhaegar." It didn't need to be said. How if it weren't for Tyene Martell? Euron Greyjoy would have captured their babies. There are so many threats. Joffrey and the Night King. Confident in the battle, danger to his own person never faced him. His honour, his duty. He fought to live up to it, because in the grand scheme of things, his life was expendable. But Dany, his children, anguish crossed him even thinking about such a loss. "And today, I almost lost you." Leaning up, Dany kissed his neck, earning a comforting moan she longed for. A giggle stubbornly escaped as the stubble tickled her nose. "Gods, I love you so." "You didn't lose me, Jon." He relaxed slightly, but not to the full, free extent of him from all the tension at all. "My love, do you want me to tell you about what I first thought with child? With our beautiful children?" She was rewarded by wondrous grey eyes, sparkling. "I gave birth to them after sparring with Sir Barristan, in the middle of the Great Grass Sea. He and Doreah helped me." Jon nodded. "A good man, Doreah." Feeling Dany turn on her side, back facing him, He shifted over on the bed as well. One arm rested below her head, while the other wrapped around her, holding his wife close. Smiling softly as John settled in behind her, the two of them fitting together like a perfect puzzle, Danny continued. It seemed so surreal. I didn't feel any different for months. Not while growing larger. It wasn't until I felt them kick inside me that I truly realized we had made 2 children. She felt him stroke her stomach, feather-like kisses pressed against her neck. I would do anything for them, John. I would too. Danny purred when he refused to stop his gentle caresses. I love you, John, more than anything. And I you, Danny. His heart burned for her. You are the most amazing woman I've ever known. I hope so, she teased. The smirk faltered when something came into her mind. Was there ever another, while we were apart? She wouldn't fault him if there was. Silence came from John. It was still hard to think about losing her. One. Just one. From his silence, Danny could tell it didn't end well, and that he cared for this lost maiden in some way. Who was she? A wildling woman. I never meant for it to happen. She was just someone I bonded with. I wouldn't call it love, but we cared for each other a great deal. I lost her when Rhaegal saved me from the dead. He pulled her closer to him, their skin mashing together. You? Biting her lip, Danny wasn't as cavalier with her experiences. Only proactive conduct on her part spared for what was likely a husband that cared not for her comfort or consent. And the other. One as well. It was a mistake. From what she could remember of that night, too much wine on both their parts had led to a reasonably pleasurable evening. Dario pleased her, but more to prove something rather than to just please her, as John so lovingly did. But one that she did not plan on repeating. He's in Marine, so you'll never have to deal with him. Jealous as he was, John reminded himself that there was no need to be. It's fine, Danny. After all, he turned her in his arms. I am the one that secured your hand. Oh, you did, she moaned as John kissed her neck. Until the end of my days. They start kissing again in this, and John says something in Valyrian, but I can't speak Valyrian, so I'm not speaking that. Pulling back, Danny gazed upon him, stunned. Accent still a deep northern brogue. The words were nevertheless firm with a command of the language. Miss Sunday's given me more lessons, he offered in response. He continues to amaze me. She cupped his cheek, responds in Valyrian, and then with that she pulled his mouth to hers. What the fuck is wrong with you? Laughing good-naturedly, Tormund smacked Grey Worm on the back. Stronger than his tone and form suggested, the unsullied commander didn't budge much, but his teeth chattered from the cold. None of you cockless bitches have ever felt real cold. The northerners around the fire laughing with wine spilling from the ground beneath them. Grey Worm turned back to Tormund with a glare. That's this not possible. He couldn't comprehend anything worse than this or Winterfell. Setting off on a further round of chuckles, Tyrion took a swig from his cup. Get this cockless man some liquid courage. It'll fortify him. Gendry, laughing with the rest of them, watched as a mug of mead found itself thrust into Grey Worm's shaking hands from an unknown person. The liquor was flowing freely, and many toasts to the king and queen had been raised thanks to such. Sipping the liquid, Grey Worm blanched. How can you like the taste? Disgust exasperated his tone. A life without wine is not a proper life. Tyrion mused. You'll get used to the taste. Keep drinking. Shocking, the unsullied commander took another swig. So fierce on the battlefield, and still so much like a fucking virgin. Tormund chuckled at his analogy. The cold north of the wall. Now that's one that'll freeze your prick off. Been there, chuckled Robb. Worse than Winterfell. He downed the rest of his mug. A southerner with sense. Several pairs of puzzled eyes stared at Tormund. Anyone living south of the fucking wall is a southerner to me. He poured himself another cup, so drunk that half the liquid spilled over him. Anyway, all the furs in the world couldn't keep out the cold. Walking helps. Fighting's better. Fucking's the best help. He grinned, obviously tipsy. Sometimes. A hiccup rocked his chest. Sometimes there's no woman to do it with. They all laughed, and Greyram's eyes flickered to Missandei, enjoying herself talking with Rosalind, Frey, and Shay. Tyrion nearly fell out of his chair. Oh, ho, ho, ho! One of the worst problems in the world. Not having a warm woman nearby. So, how do you deal with it? We make do. Looking over at Gendry, eyes locking, Tormund smirked. Shuddering, Gendry opened his mouth to speak when the ginger wildling collapsed onto the ground, blackout drunk. There was silence. Been there, done that, Tyrion said, breaking the ice and leading another round of laughter. The young blacksmith took that opportunity to sneak off while the others yelled for another keg. Walking through the crowds of revellers, Gendry couldn't help but feel the celebration was starting to taper off into its inevitable conclusion. Knocked out soldiers, usually face deep in a puddle of spilt mead or sour wine, was strewn everywhere, as were the pale fools retching their stomachs out in corners. Or not in corners, as did the one Gendry barely dodged before the vomit landed on his tunic. Those lucky enough to pair with a woman were dashing towards whatever privacy they could find. Or not at all. Lowborn and highborn alike were finding their victory toasts in the warm arms of warm bodies. Is that Jorah? The woman was clearly Lady Stark. Perhaps he's just helping her inside. Rolling his eyes, he stepped around another cluster of passed-out drunks, only for a pair of small, very persistent hands to push him into a stairwell. Don't talk, Gendry. Lips crashing into his, Arya felt the unfamiliar passion inside her. Perhaps it was the wine. Perhaps it was the exhilaration from notching another name off of her list. Perhaps it was the fact that she was a grown woman, and for the first time, Gendry got in harm's way. Whatever it was, she wanted him desperately. I have, she mumbled in between kisses. First set up, at the top of the tower. Take me there. Arya yelped as her man lifted her, kissed her yet again as her legs wrapped around him. Afterward, Arya couldn't help but stretching languidly out on the furs. Freezing around them, underneath the shared body heat made them nice and cosy. God, that was amazing. Now I am completely sure you're a woman. And a fair maiden at that. Ow! He rubbed his pec, still smarting where Arya had smacked it. Betrothed and still hitting me. Arya scowled at him. I may be a woman, but I am not a fair lady or maiden or whatever. I don't care if we're married for 30 years. Abruptly feeling his lips on hers, Arya stopped talking and melted into the kiss. You're such a bitch, she laughed, slightly lightheaded, but I love you regardless. Gendry smiled. Same. Sighing, he fell back, staring at the stars. I only wish I was good enough. A base-born bastard has no choice for a high-born woman. Suppressing the temptation to hit him again, Arya gripped his chin and forced him to look at her. Firstly, I'd marry you even if you were the bastard son of a manure shoveler. Second, a smile curled on her face. Jon is planning on legitimizing you. Her smile grew at the shock on his face. Make way for the hand! The bell at the inner gate rang twice, signalling Lord Lannister's return. Inside the royal cellar, Joffrey paced back and forth. Don't be afraid, All Highest, said Sir Amory Lorch, doing his best to comfort his sovereign. Item 2 in the brown-nosed playbook after flattery. You must stand up to him. Grandfather is not in charge here. I am, he snarled, but continued to pace. If he ruled over Tywin, then why was he shaking so? Your grandfather will know about River Run, All Highest. Cersei pointed out, not even looking at her son. He disgusted her more and more. Joffrey sneered. I will bring it under control myself. I command you not to tell anyone. He gestured to both Qyburn and the High Sparrow, also present to greet the Lord Hand's return from Dawn. No one. Quiet descended over the room as the door swung open. both warriors' sons outside standing straight. Shining plate armour swaddled in his red gold tunic, still battle-ready form of Tywin Lannister strode into the room. He offered no greetings, spared glances at no one, simply proceeded until he was directly in front of his grandson. "What news of the north?" Sensing his ruler's stare boring into his back, Qyburn cleared his throat. "No word has arrived today, Lord Hand. We've dispatched ravens to Sir Jaime this morning." Such was true. Nothing had come that day, so far. "Interesting," Lord Tywin remarked, his tone polite to the point of mockery. Cersei, Qyburn, and the High Sparrow, seated by the table in the corner, and standing on either side of the Hand respectively, made sure to give him a wide berth and slink into the shadows. Tywin, stepping closer to his grandson, ignored them and focused his piercing eyes on the face behind the shroud. "I heard word in Dawn that over half our northern army has been annihilated." And so he knew, a forlorn hope that the man that destroyed Castamere and made Dawn howl would be ignorant of just how massive the defeat at Riverrun had been. "Your uncle missing for a week, thousands of your brother's bannermen defecting, and Daenerys Targaryen's dragons all alive and well." He chuckled darkly. "All the while nearly 25,000 men were lost." Joffrey, arrogance not leaving his posture at the head of the room, snorted derisively. "Nothing but peasants and street scum, grandfather. I've decreed conscripts be made. That'll plump up the ranks against the bastard and his whore." Opening his mouth to retort, Tywin stopped as the door burst open. "All highest!" Meryn Trant stated, his face ashen. A basket was propped in the crook of his arm. "I told you I wasn't to be disturbed by the likes of you," snarled Joffrey. "Urgent dispatch from Lord Tarley at Harrenhal, and a gift from Riverrun, all highest." Trant's face was as white as a ghost. Muttering obscenities barely audible through the gossamer shroud, Joffrey waved at him. "Give it to the woman," he ordered dismissively, "and put the basket here." Trant did as ordered, handing the dispatch to Cersei, who stood to take it. "Leave us!" One could easily see the fearful relief that washed over Trant. "Thank you, sire." He hurried out, shutting the door. Cersei perused through the letter. She was never the best reader, and Ralda Tarley apparently didn't bother to learn the finer points of penmanship. The message that became apparent soon enough, ice filling her veins. "The Dothraki have, sacked Harrenhal." Tywin blinked. "What?" "The Dothraki have sacked Harrenhal." Her father snatched the dispatch from her fingers. Cersei ran a hand through her hair in fear, absent-mindedly flicking open the leather flap that covered the gift. Bile spewed up to her mouth, and she collapsed back into a chair with a gasp, blood leaving her face and eyes haunted. Peering down at the contents of the basket, Tywin reached down and gingerly scooped up the blackened, ash-coated skull within. Balanced on top was a signet ring, the intricate lion carving worn only by one, Tigget Lannister, his own brother. Tywin pursed her lips, the High Sparrow prayed silently, and even Joffrey seemed taken aback. Not one vicious, haughty word even murmured from his lips. Dropping the skull, Tywin expected the single leaf of parchment within. "To the usurper Joffrey Baratheon and Lord Tywin Lannister, the North remembers. Winter has come, and brings fire and blood for houses Lannister and the Chimera, for their crimes against the people. Let this be a warning. Jaehaerys of House Targaryen Stark, third of his name. Daenerys of House Targaryen Stark, first of her name." "My gods! Your own brother!" Amory Lorch wore an expression of half disgust, half incredulity upon his face. His genuineness was quite warm. Only the most observant and skilled could tell that they were mere crocodile tears. "They are truly the Mad King's spawn." Expression grim, feeling every bit his over 6 decades upon the earth, Tywin began to pace around the table. "If they can capture Harrenhal, then they can be at King's Landing within a fortnight." Divining the meaning of the names in titles, he knew that the Stark bastard was not named Jaehaerys, apparently now married to the Targaryen bitch. could be reserved for another time. Lorch came forward, close to Tywin. "We will stop them. The whore and her bastard lover won't stand a chance." Closing his eyes, Tywin exhaled in muted fury. "Was it you, Lorch, that came up with the plan?" Watching Lorch step back with a worried set of his jaw, Cersei nodded with a barely suppressed smirk. "Good." Before anyone could react, Tywin grabbed Lorch by the scruff of his tunic and pitched him out of the window. Panicked screams were heard, followed by a sickening crunch of bone. Ducking his head for but a moment out in the open air, the Lord of Casterly Rock felt satisfied at the broken corpse laying on the stone floor of the gardens. The Goldcloaks racing over to inspect the bloody remains. Those assembled were still in shock over what happened. Tywin jerked his steel-gloved hand and slammed his fist into Joffrey's face. The Chimera himself went sprawling on the ground, crying out in pain, "Joffrey!" Motherly instincts taking over, Cersei made to go to him, but was thrown back into her chair by the backhanded slap from her father. "Get in your chair and stay there, woman," hissed Tywin, adding a fiery gaze at the two other men within the room. Neither Qyburn or the High Sparrow said anything, much to their advantage. Climbing over to where his grandson lay moaning on the floor, Tywin swung his foot into his stomach, earning another cry and a strangled gasp of air forced out of his lungs. A second kick followed for good measure, and Tywin collapsed into his own chair, stare zeroing in on the basket containing his brother's skull. "I must offer a truce," he mused, to no one in particular, stifling a cough that threatened to hack up from his lungs. "Buy some time." So many pieces were clicking in his mind. But they would take weeks, and thanks to Joffrey's idiocy in military matters, they did not have weeks. "I'm not going, though," he chortled, sending him back into a fit of coughs. "Seven ells!" Tywin's hand flew to his mouth, trying to stem the tide. "It might be my child's skull next, and not my impetuous grandson." He spared a glance to the moaning, crying form of the mighty God King, blood coating his shroud as Joffrey curled into a fetal position from the pain. "One word out of his mouth, and half our allies will be under the Dragon Queen's banner by the next day. But who to send?" Another cough felt like his lungs were stoking a fire. "Who?" Looking at the ceiling, he ultimately set on one, golden hair glinting from the firelight. "Come on, you lazy sack of shit!" None of the other second sons, individualistic in dress and arrogant in swagger, carried whips, but in every other manner acted the part of the wise masters perfectly. "Move your asses!" The carts rocked as the crates of weapons and sacks of grain were lifted by the freedmen and hauled to the waiting ships. They all worked for wages now, but the patient observer saw nothing much had changed from how the Queen had sailed away. Brushing past the observer as if he wasn't even there, which in all honesty he wasn't. The bearded man had tripled the hubris of any other sellsword. It wasn't long before the observer knew why. The man was a familiar face. "Looking at these people, it's no wonder the wise masters kept them on a short leash." The words were muttered, but he heard them all the same. "Useless fucks," his companion muttered. "Faster!" The barking got the roustabouts to move just a little bit quicker, if only to avoid more abuse. Dust kicked up into clouds by the shifting feet. The new figure that approached the others was covered in it. "Naharis, what is the meaning of this?" The sellsword, Naharis, shrugged. "Transfer of my forces to Westeros, Mosador. Our armies there are in need of reinforcement." "And how could you possibly know that?" said another man, dressed far more well off, every inch the wise master, and a wealthy one at that. "The Queen's orders for you to stay here. Yonka and Astapor have already rejected our authority, and Volantis is allying with them. We need the second sons here." "Orders from the Queen herself." Naharis handed the two men a dispatch with the Targaryen seal. "There was a major setback, Zorlorak. The Stark bastard suffered a large defeat and lost much of his army." "No, they haven't." The observer, who had just been at River Run and knew better, wanted to shout it, but it was futile. Soldiers continued to embark on the ships. The freed men continued to load them. The lie and deception unchallenged, with the truth thousands of miles away. Eyes opening, Bran Stark found himself staring at the ceiling of his bedroom. Shadows danced in the orange glow of the candlelight. Another secret vision. Another unauthorized use of shade of the evening. But one that brought him even closer to discovering the weight of intrigue that threatened to constrict Jon and Daenerys like a python. Bran! He turned to his right to see the expectant, worried face of Mira. Her eyes flickered with worry, then relief. Thank the gods, you're fine. Looks like we have safely say he can manage the correct dosage. Ply Curry, youthful expression belaying his exuberance. What did you see, Bran? He looked back at the shapes imposed on the ceiling. More? And more. Perhaps they needed to leave Karth after all. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that, because I certainly did. Wow, that was quite a chapter. Sorry if some of it was a bit halting near the front there, just after the revelers and the puking and stuff. Because that was a sex scene, but there was a lot of important dialogue, so I sort of had to read around it, you know, censoring. You guys know I'm not comfortable with that. But anyway, what's going on with Daario? Why is he going to Westeros? Who sent that letter? Because we know Dany didn't. So, Bran's having more visions. And Gendry's going to be legitimized. Ah, wow. I like this chapter, I genuinely do. And I hope you guys did too. Anyway, bye my guys, gals and non-binary pals. Remember to like, comment and subscribe and yada yada yada. And I will see you in another one of my videos. Bye!